Well, hello again, guys. We're going to this is going to be a shorter just version. Just wanted to kind of finish the PowerPoint out. So it sets us up for the next kind of class and discussion. Let me pull up our PowerPoint. All right. Let's go down here. So one thing we want to start about, we started kind of talking about these elements that are needed to nourish a person, so they become the reciprocating self. And we talked about that, the covenant, this unconditional love. We talked about grace. We talked about empowerment. We talked about intimacy. So I just want to give us just an example, a small view. I won't go through all life stages, but I'll just start with like infancy. So you go with this infancy, and when you think about covenant, you think about unconditional love, but you also think about consistent, consistent and adequate emotional support. It's a sense of when the child is wrong, it's still a sense of like displaying the love for them. That shouldn't change. Be like, oh man, I got a different. I feel differently about you. But it's a sense of like this consistent emotional support. When the child is doing well, giving them that emotional support. When they're not doing as well, giving them that emotional support. This is unconditional love. This is this covenant that we want to kind of show with them and say, hey, we're steady here. We're going to be consistent with you. Because what happens is once there are predictable patterns for a child, they understand this is how it works. For example, if a baby cries and mom comes to him or dad comes to her and rubs her head and lays her down, and they know every time they cry that and mom and dad are going to be there. Mom and dad are going to be supportive of me. My emotions get too high when I start this crying. They start developing these patterns. But on the opposite side, if it's conditional, if it's every time I cry, mom and dad go away, then that communicates to a child, even at a young age, to be like, they're not going to be there. They're not going to be there. There's no need of me crying. I heard a very gut-wrenching story by Russell Moore. He talks about going to a Russian orphanage. And he said it was very eerie because there were a number of babies there, but it was all quiet. It's because the babies had learned that there's no need of me crying. There's nobody who's going to come. These are the patterns. These are the things that kind of babies build inside themselves. So that's why they need that consistent emotional support. They need you to be there for. They need to be consistent. But even in children's ministry, consistent emotional support, even as a children's minister. Then there's grace. So in the literature, in parenting literature, you'll find this word kind of monitoring. It's essentially like, man, your baby's gonna go and they're gonna do certain things, and you're there with them. You're monitoring them. This is communicating, man. I'm here with you. There's presence. My presence is here with you. But then there's this sense of like, man, if the baby is left to do all these things by themselves and no one monitors them, that communicates this thing of ungrace. I don't think it's a word, but it's a word I heard in What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey. But it just talks about this sense of, man, if a child is there just making mistakes by themselves, man, that's not a gracious thing. But if you can be there with them, let them explore, let them make mistakes, that communicates something to them. That parent, that children's minister, is going to be there though they make mistakes. Now it's not so much you just let them do whatever they want to. You go to like that empowerment. That's that next one with like, man, you got these another word just from the literature, just from like research about parenting is intervention strategies where you have to come in, you have to kind of direct and kind of correct in ways so they can be so they can be, you know, that reciprocating self. They can learn how to be in those mutually satisfying relationships. They need the parents kind of intervening for them if they're going to come so Listed here, Proverbs 3:11 through 12, and it talks about, and this is what the verse says. It says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him who he loves. As a father, the son is whom he delights." The main thing I want to communicate there is that the Father loves us, so he corrects us. If we want people to come, the reciprocating selves, if we love them, we must correct them. That looks different for anybody, but that's a sense of still you have to empower. You have to intervene in infancy. But then there's a sense of like intimacy. How do you build this intimacy for an infant? Well, you got to think about these things, and man, there's a difference between over controlling and under controlling. Excuse me. Over controlling is, man, I'm trying to control every move, everything that they do. This is an over control. If I'm under control, then that means, man, I just let them do whatever they want to do. That's not going to help them, because if you think about them developing, if, man, you got this over control that kind of happens, then they're always going to be at this deficit because they weren't empowered. They were just controlled. And they don't know how to be close to people. They know how to be controlled or under controlling, in a sense where nobody intervened. They don't learn how to be close and open with because nobody ever intervened with them. These are just things I want to keep in mind as we think about just throughout life stages. We all need these in order to develop healthily. We need that covenant, unconditional love, that grace, empowerment, and intimacy. And this is just an example from like infancy. And if a child gets this through infancy, through to childhood, through adolescence, through being a young adult and being a senior adult, like these are things that help to build character, to help them to develop in the way that I think they should develop as, because they're made in the image of God. So now we're going to change direction just a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the psychological theories. I'm not going to spend as much time because as we go through the chapters in the textbook, we'll find out more and more about these. We'll go in depth to. So these are just general things you think about. Psychoanalytic. This was founded by Freud. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe not, but Freud had these stages, these psychosexual stages. Like I said, we'll read a lot more about these things. But he emphasized like this unconsciousness, this preconscious, subconscious. Talks about the element of personality, how it's made into the id, the ego, the superego. But one of the things we want to capture here is that this is a secular theory, but he talks about the id. The id is described as like the basic instinct. It's described as like the fleshly desires as we would know it. So as you think about the id, and we read about the id, as you read about it in your text, think about fallen nature. Think about sin and how sin interacts. Sin it causes us to be very self-seeking, just like the id. So Freud has this small amount of truth about the fallen nature of men, this how we sin, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Because we look through all these theories, they have a small bit of truth, but it's not complete. It's incomplete because they don't take into consideration the truths that we know that are in the Bible that we all can see and really we can see. But anyway, looking at this theory does not acknowledge how people change as a result of interaction with others. It doesn't take into consideration that as we interact with others, as a son interacts with his mother or a daughter with her father or vice versa, that it changes us. It acknowledges those things. So it's got this glimmer of truth, but not all the way there. Not all the way there. This next thing, you got social learning theory, more like this behaviorist that count, which is just basically saying that we learn by observing. We're conditioned in certain ways. Look at this chart over here. Just talks about man behavior and environment, and then the person and these cognitive factors. So this is what they think about people. But as you hone in just a little bit more, you'll find that their concept of self is not clearly defined. And we can validate. Children learn through behavior. They learn through observation. They see mom and daddy do something, they want to mimic it. It's funny. I think about my children and how there's certain things that I say, and my kids will come right back at it. They'll be like, they'll say no because daddy says no a lot. That's what they've observed. That affects their behavior. But once again, we think about this theory, social learning theory, and how they learn from observation. The idea of the self is not clearly defined, so they don't have a great grasp on this. So glimmers of truth, but not the whole gamut. Okay. So cognitive development. We got John Piaget, who's cognitive theorist, and he came up with what these called like the stages of development. And once again, you'll talk about these in a lot more depth. I'm really just scratching the surface here with like sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete, and formal operational like stages. So he thinks about like how a child goes through development. But here's the thing: that it doesn't take into the effects that it thinks that the effective relationship are less important in development. It doesn't emphasize what can happen as we engage with others. So still, this we can say, man, we look at these stages and we can talk about these. We'll talk about these in a lot of depth, and you'll see glimmers of truth, but still, there are limits here. Doesn't take into a lot of things. Doesn't take into the doesn't take into consideration the relationships and how they affect a person's development. Next thing, so what we want to understand, I just went through a brief thing of like these theories. We didn't go through all of them. We'll go through them a lot more depth as we go throughout the class. One thing, another thing, man, is that secular theories are not neutral. They all have a worldview. They all have what they believe about the self and the goal of development. They're not neutral. They have what they think about people, and some of them discount spirituality. So we want to see them and say, man, they are not neutral. But when we say they're not neutral and they have these worldviews that behind them, this is not saying they're obsolete. This is just saying, man, they have some stances that we as believers can't really agree with, but that doesn't mean we throw them out completely. Think about this. You brush your teeth this morning, probably. Do you know who created the toothbrush? Do you know the worldview behind the person that created the toothbrush? But what happened if we did? What happened if we do find out that the man who created the toothbrush was a hedonist, was a pagan and a devil worshiper? Does it stop from brushing our teeth? No, because we know the effects of brushing our teeth, and we know it just really does help. So that's an extreme example, but what I wanted to just understand is, yeah, they're not neutral. Yeah, they have these worldviews behind them, but that doesn't mean we totally discredit them. It says, hey, we can look at these and say, all right, where's truth? And then we can say, hey, where's falsities? Where's lies? Where are things we can't agree with? And we can say, yeah, I gotta throw that out. I can't get in line with that. But that doesn't mean they don't have a glimmer of truth. I mean, remember this old adage, it says a broken clock is right twice a day. All right. So the critique of these developmental theories is that they don't take into consideration the human agency, but also they don't acknowledge sin. They don't have this understanding that we live in a broken world with broken people. We as believers know that man, people have some things going on with them since the fall. We can verify this because you don't have to teach a child to lie. You don't teach a child to steal. You really don't have to teach those things. That there's that sin within them. So if we're going to understand humans and how they develop, we got to understand that, man, there's some sin within them. The next thing they don't take into consideration freedom. I mean, some of them do, some of them don't. But still, we got to understand, man, we read the Bible that our choices, we're accountable for those. Because some of them overemphasize the environment, some of them overemphasize genetics. But one thing we got to take in consideration is that the Bible presents us with, yeah, we're going to be responsible for our choices. You think about Judgment Day, where it says, like, every careless word and deed will be held against you because there's essentially we're beings that make choices. But that also takes in sense like the responsibility. And we have a responsibility. So some of them think take into consideration that some of them don't. It's that emphasis like, man, that nature versus nurture. What has more effect? Is it how I grew up? Is it the genes that I have? They fall on, there's ditch on both sides of those roads. But then a lot of them don't take consideration. We see throughout these theories, they don't take consideration that as we're in relationship with others, it affects the development of self. But they don't take into consideration that we were made in the image of God. We were made to be relational beings because that reflects who God is, who is a relational being Father, Son, Holy Spirit, unique, but in a unique relationship with each other that does not distinguish their uniqueness. Listen to this. Human nature requires an empowering community of grace. Hear that? Empowerment and grace. We talked about that. That is based on covenant. Covenant, we talked about that. Commitment. This foundation leads to intimacy. Intimacy within which they can experience the secure emotional bonding they crave. These are things that we think about this definition, man. Think about this concept. This is so helpful. As we think about people flourishing, people think about development, we got to ask the question, man, where does community of grace come to play? Where's this covenant come to play? Where's the intimacy? Where's the, how do they get that secure emotional bonding? Because all these theories have an idea of what's going to be healthy about human development. They have an idea of like what a healthy self looks like. But we as believers have to say, no, we got to come back and say, no, a healthy self looks like a reciprocating self, looks like a self that is unique because it was knitted together in the mother's womb, but then it created to be in a relationship, in a unique fellowship with God and with other humans. These are things we want to keep in consideration as we think about these theories of development. We're going to talk about human development in depth throughout this book that doesn't come from a Christian background. We want to keep our Christian worldview in front of us because it's important. We have these foundations of truth. We know the Bible, the Bible. That's the book for me. We have that, and we want to keep that here as we're going through this book. So guys, that's just how I want to start with this class, because our other things, we may not have explicit biblical content, but it'll be there. It'll be there. It'll be there. And we just want to keep our eyes open to be like, all right, where's truth? What does God say is true? What God says sin. If it says it's sins, we can't abide by this. We can't take this in. We can acknowledge that they got pieces of truth, but we can always say they're going to be deficient if they don't take in consideration that men are made in the image of God, created to be in a relationship with Him and other humans. All right, guys, until next time.